Greetings, it's EKB here with you once again to cover the founding of our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. If you enjoy this content, please be kind enough to subscribe and to drop a like at the same time. I greatly appreciate all of the support and the attention. So, let us begin. Called upon to plan a city worthy of the new American Republic, French architect Pierre-Charles L'Enfant produced a masterpiece. His scheme was sweeping and majestic, and reflected American ideals as L'Enfant placed the Capitol building on Jenkins Hill and intended its rotunda to be centered precisely on the center of the city. Thus, the Capitol, from whence the people reigned, occupied the most visually impressive and symbolically significant point in the city. Washington, the capital of the United States of America, was born, named for its president, who himself called it the Federal City out of modesty. Washington emerged slowly over the centuries. Today, it is a truly impressive city, not without its flaws, some of which, such as its hot, stuffy climate, were foreseen in the beginning, but certainly a positive assessment of American ideals, now attracts millions of visitors, eager to attend tours of the White House, view the many monuments, or experience the culture, history, and science in the largest museum complex in the world, established by the Smithsonian Institution. As one might expect in a city designed for and dedicated to the government of the country, most of the city's economy relies on the government in one way or another. This has spurred economic issues. However, since many of these industries cannot be taxed by the city, Congress has ultimate jurisdiction over the city as well. Citizens must be content with less standing in the federal government than their state-dwelling neighbors. Not until 1961 did residents receive the right to vote for the presidents, and in recent years many have taken to wryly displaying an odd battle cry for the Revolutionary War. No taxation without representation, to protest their lack of representation in Congress. Their sole delegate attends the House of Representatives, but cannot vote. At one point, the Potomac River became so heavily polluted that President Lyndon B. Johnson described it as a national disgrace. Today, it is clean and vibrant, thanks to the concerted efforts of concerned citizens. In fact, Washington, D.C., despite its overwhelmingly urban character, protects an array of wild areas, yet another tourist attraction in a city famed for its monuments and museums. An architectural ode to the political ideas of America, Washington is fittingly complex and strikingly a capstone of the United States of America. The district. At the end of the Revolutionary War, the new state found themselves struggling over wartime debts. Most southern states had already paid theirs. Most northern states had not. Consequently, the North favored allowing the federal government to assume these debts. The South, annoyed by the prospect of increased federal taxes, objected. Resolution came, as it often does, with a compromise. The federal government would take over the debts, but the capital of the new nation would be based in the South. So, at a dinner hosted by Thomas Jefferson, the two early statesmen, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, hammered out the deal, and in 1790, Congress appointed George Washington to choose a location, hoping to one day build a canal linking the Tidewater to the Ohio River. Washington chose a site at the confluence of the Potomac and the Anacostia rivers. European design. The great genius behind the city's design came from France, an architect and engineer named Pierre-Charles Elephant, taking his cue from the Baroque style of European cities then in vogue. Elephant called for grand avenues, open circles at cross streets, and views orchestrated by running long, straight streets from hills and high points. Elephant's expansive designs were realized slowly. Before President Washington marked out the 100-square-mile capital carved out of Maryland and Virginia's land, only the little town of Georgetown had existed nearby. Otherwise, no one had attempted to settle the swampy land once inhabited by the Piscataway Indians. With no established commerce and few inhabitants besides the federal government employees, for the first years of its life, the capital resembled nothing so much as a muddy ruin. Congress moved into the Capitol, and President John Adams into the White House, then called the President's House, in 1800, but the buildings were unfinished, and the National Mall an impossible swamp. Indeed, when the British burned the Capitol during the War of 1812, it barely affected the city's construction. Lincoln's legacy. The Capitol did not truly begin to emerge until the Civil War. When the population exploded, the district was smaller now, having returned land to the government by Virginia in 1846. But the war forced new industries to develop almost overnight. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln became the only sitting president to be present during a battle, and later became the first presidential assassination victim in Ford's Theater on 10th Street. Almost immediately, the city became a staging ground for the nation's troubled race relations. Most impressively of this history, perhaps, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his most famous speech, "I Have a Dream," from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Capital improvements. Today, although the city struggles with a severe economic gap between its affluent and impoverished citizens, the capital has become what Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and Pierre-Charles Elephant had always intended it to be, a beacon of American republicanism and a true cosmopolitan arena. As a city, Washington, D.C. still has work to do, addressing poverty, corruption, and a burdened educational system. But as a symbol, nothing better represents the promise of America than its monuments, museums, and dignified representations.